for hosting us here. We're really excited to do an event with TiE and really excited about the long-term opportunities to work together. I just wanted to give a quick overview of who the Sierra Club is, who we are and what we do, and why we're interested in this space in particular. So the Sierra Club was founded in 1892, so we are the oldest and largest environmental organization in the United States. We have 2.1 million members and supporters across the US, including chapters in every state, and we're really a volunteer-driven organization. So our volunteers help set our priorities, and since our foundation, that has really been about conserving and protecting wild spaces and the planet. And over the last 10 to 15 years, our mission has really morphed into one about transitioning energy systems. And of course, most of the work we do is here at home in the United States, and it's focused on deploying as much clean energy as possible and transitioning our grid excuse me, from a dirty fossil fuel powered grid to a clean energy powered grid. And I am the Associate Director for the International Program, which means I get to focus on the really exciting opportunities in clean energy, which I am convinced are off the grid. So I'm very excited to hear what our panelists have to say tonight, and very interested to see what everybody is able to do in this space. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gopal. Thanks. Oh, wait, sorry. One more thing. I forgot to make a plug. So we're also a membership organization, and we have brochure booklets on every table. So please check it out. We would love to have anybody who's interested get involved with what we're up to.
Hi guys, welcome. Welcome to this exciting evening. The question is, why are we here? I heard we are here. We all want to know how do we make more money because we are all entrepreneurs. That's good. But I think there's another aspect of why are we also here, apart from making money, is at least when I started working for Clean Tech, I did not sign up for making a tough choice between breathing or eating. As some of our, some people on this mother planet they have done it. And it is a time to pause and make a connection. Do we also want to be eating and breathing? And I think this group of people and these panelists, this group of people, they have either made it happen or you will make it happen. And I think it's your time today to really get ready with your questions and take advantage of this distinguished panel. Please give them a big hand and thank them for coming here. Today's topic, powering India's poor with mobile phones, mini grids, and community power. It's a great topic to talk about, and I think that we can solve both the genius of ends. We can solve the problems, we can serve the humanity, and you can all make money too. So with that, I really would like or request our panelists to talk about themselves and introduce themselves to the audience, starting with you, Carl.
Okay, I'm Carl Pope, and for many years I was with the Sierra Club. I was the CEO for 18 years. But before I worked for the Sierra Club, मैंने 200 के लिए नौकरी की बिहार में. For those of you who may be from South India, I said for 2 years, 45 years ago, I worked in Bihar in a small village which had electricity. And I was a little bit stunned 4 years ago. I was in Mumbai, and I was at the launch of a major solar lantern program. And the Minister of New and Renewable Energies, Farooq Abdullah, was speaking, and he laid out the numbers. Globally, 1.2 billion people with no electricity in the 21st century, 400 million of them roughly in India, and another 2 billion with what I would call spasmodic electricity. It's there sometimes, but not necessarily when you need it. And that's another 400 million people in India. So of India's 1.2 billion people, 800 million cannot count on the electricity that here in the United States we take for granted. You flip the switch, more or less what comes on. And what was also quite stunning was when Minister Abdullah talked about the billions of dollars that the government of India spends each year trying to make it possible for poor people to keep a kerosene lantern lit. And there is no equivalent effort being made to make it possible for people to flip a switch and have electricity. And it became quite clear, listening to Minister Abdullah, that whatever the problem of villages without light and power is, it is not because they can't afford it. Because the kerosene costs more than modern energy solutions would cost. Not just a little bit more. Probably costs 5 or 6 times as much. So I began to devote myself to figuring out what was the problem and how can we find a solution.
Great.
Hello everybody. My name is Sandhya Hegde. I work for the Khosla Impact Fund, which is Vinod Khosla's personal venture capital fund for frontier markets. And our core thesis is around that of productivity. So while we are an impact investor, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with sort of the social enterprise impact investing space, what we really want to do is bring extremely commercial focus on growth and product market fit and high values of customer service to frontier market businesses trying to work in rural India or rural Africa. And the reason why I'm doing this, decided to chime in about this largely because of Carl's beautiful introduction. I've spent a lot of my time growing up in rural India, and if I look at the places that my aunts and uncles and my grandparents live in, their access to electricity has not changed in 30 years. It's pretty much still where it was probably, at least from what I have seen 20 years ago. And a lot of it is not because they don't have money to pay for services or products, but because there hasn't been innovation and risk-taking that has actually reached them. And the government, we most of all will agree, is a little bit too slow in terms of their ability to affect change, to be able to reach them maybe in the next 20 years as well. So that's sort of one reason why I'm doing this. I've always been fascinated with energy. I started an energy business a few years ago, which worked in energy efficiency and diesel replacement myself. So when I started working with Vinod, we decided that this would be a core focus area for us. And I would love to understand what other questions you guys have for us in this space, and also learn a lot from the great panelists around here.
Hi, I'm Mohan Bhatia, and I'm from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I'm from the International Energy Studies Group. So about the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, it's in Berkeley. It's a fairly large national lab, about 4,000 staff and 10 Nobel laureates on staff. And so we also have a fairly large international program, which I'm the deputy for. We really look at the energy access issues in a lot of emerging countries, including India. We have a lot of folks from India on staff and a lot of Indians in the leadership of the lab. So we really want to connect with TiE and this community to understand. We work mostly on broader policy and economic issues, but we really want to connect with the entrepreneur, that business side of things, and try to understand and give our inputs and feedback. So in terms of our perspective of working on these issues, so if you look at comparative, if you compare India and China, China also has similar population. If you look at their energy consumption in terms of what the residential consumer access includes, it's almost 6 to 7 times India. So currently India's demand is 150 gigawatts of power. China is 800 gigawatts of power, same population. So what I'm trying to say is that if you really look at economic development or a development path, it kind of captures similar nations and the size of the opportunity. You don't have to go the same route in terms of providing that, but it just tells you a country which is of similar size and what scale the investments have happened in power. It doesn't have to be the same technology, and that's where the opportunity is. That fortunately India is at a stage. If this was 10 years ago when the solar and other technologies were very expensive, then the play was not that much. But India is at a stage where the train has not left the station in terms of big growth, and the technologies have, the costs have come down for alternative technology, and that's where the opportunity is.
Hi, my name is Sanjay Dani. I'm a CEO and founder of Set Up Power Solutions, based here in San Francisco. I'm a product of Silicon Valley. And somebody was asking me just before, what's your background? Until 2 years ago, I did not know energy. I'd done software startups, I'd done internet startups, I'd done nonprofits. I went back to business school about 5 years ago. And then, about 2 years ago, a friend of mine from business school came here to a big German delegation. He said, you know what, we're going to meet all the clean tech companies. And can you come along? I was sort of the de facto Silicon Valley guy in my class. And I said, sure. And I visited a lot of the well-known clean technology companies in Silicon Valley. And one thing struck me is that these are well-known companies that have tons of money invested into them. And somehow I realized that nobody's really asking for their product. Nobody's really, nobody has a need for it. And I said, you know what, one mantra in Silicon Valley is that if there is a need, we go meet it. And then I go back to India all the time. I grew up in a small town, like many of you, where there's no electricity many of the times. Some of my friends I grew up with, my high school buddies, they're on big companies now. Their biggest need is power. And not only they don't have enough power, they're also paying a lot of money for power that they have. Some of my friends have more electricity bill for the industry than they pay for the entire payroll. That says a lot about the country. And I think it's really, I realize that somebody has to take this technology and really create business models where there's a big need and where people are actually already paying for power more per unit of energy than all of us pay here. A lot of developed economies. So what can we do to build business models, take this technology and build solutions on top of them and take them to the right people who need it? So that's what we're doing. What we do is we help businesses in India right now to lower their energy cost by using renewable energy. So we want to always go there to lower the cost, not increase them. And we'll talk more about that as we go and look forward to hearing from all the panelists here.
My name is Jigar Shah, and I am a recovering solar entrepreneur. I've been here a lot in California, but I'm actually an East Coast guy. I lived in DC for a long time and now live in New York. But I can probably tell you about every single town in California. Driving around trying to figure out a way to sell solar here. I was born in India, and as you can tell from my accent, came over when I was very young. But like many of the folks on the panel, grew up in a small town and actually had have a lot of relatives that live there. I think that one of the things that I've done is I really think about the problems through business model and financial innovation, as opposed to technology innovation. And I think when you think about where we are today in the economics, which Carl was talking about, for solar lanterns and solar home systems and these kind of things, the paybacks are remarkably short. And so today you're thinking about paybacks for solar lanterns that might be in the 1 month range. Some of them maybe 8 to 12 weeks. And so you're starting to see real economic gains and real entrepreneurship opportunities. And so one of the things that I really focus on is how we actually bring huge amounts of mainstream capital in. I mean, just to put this in perspective for you, I think to really nail the problem in India, to give people the very basic amounts of energy that they need to live your life in what they would consider a semi-modern way, is something on the order of around $100 billion for India. And $100 billion is not that much money, right? I mean, it's just to put in perspective, the entire global solar industry this year will be roughly $100 billion. So we actually are already talking about numbers of that scale. And so I guess what I would say to you is that I think that the important part that I'm focusing on is trying to figure out how you actually bring this sort of business model innovation in place. I'll give you an example. One of the things that we invented here in the United States is this sort of pay-as-you-go, no money down solar technique, which I think has been replicated by Solar City and Sunrun and SunJersey and the other folks in the Bay Area. And you can see how you can do that actually in rural India as well. A lot of people pay between 5 and 10 cents per charge for their mobile phone because so many people in India have mobile phones but no place to charge them at home. So they go to some guy with a diesel generator and charge it there for a lot of money. So you can see how pay-as-you-go schemes actually could work in India. And there's many others of these innovations, and so I look forward to hearing your questions and talking with you.
Great, well, thank you very much for the introduction. It's great. And the one thing I learned from this introduction is that today's topic might be outdated pretty soon. It is not powering the poor. It is also powering the richest. If the payroll is smaller than the power bill, that means even richest need power more than the poor over there. Well, you know, this topic is very wide, and then I thought getting perspective from our panelists on what is the really meaning of powering the poor. Is it powering the poor, or is it empowering the poor through powering? So I really would like to understand these three areas that we picked up: the mobile phones, the mini grids, and the community power. How do you think we are really creating a difference in a country that has not seen difference in 30 years? How can these three things really power and empower the poor?
Let me begin by asking a question. How many people here at home have reasonably reliable electricity? Raise your hand if you have reasonably reliable electricity. Okay. How many of you, when you moved into your home or apartment, were asked to plug down a $25,000 deposit, which is your share of the California grid, for that power? Nobody. Now, if you're a rural villager in most of India, if you want electricity, you are asked to plunk down the capital for your share of the grid. And that's why the poor don't have electricity. Not that they can't afford to pay for it, they can't finance it. And this is not a news story. My father actually worked for the Rural Electrification Administration in the United States. And in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt was elected president, 95% of rural American households did not have electricity. And by 1941, 95% of them had electricity. So this was a problem that was solved very quickly. But it's important to understand that Roosevelt did three things. And with three things, he was able to electrify rural America in less than a decade. The first was he needed electrons. You can't have electricity unless you have generation. Well, that problem our friends in the solar industry and the wind industry have solved. There are lots of electrons available in India. Lots of wind, lots of sunshine. The second thing Roosevelt did was he made a decision that for a farmer to get electricity was a good business proposition regardless of that farmer's credit history. So he, by fiat, simply said, any group of farmers organizing themselves to get electricity are going to get a loan. We're not going to investigate their due diligence. We're not going to say what's their loan history. We're just going to say, this activity is so lucrative that everybody who wants to do it should get a loan. And the third thing he did was he put people out there who could help farmers build those power systems and use them. He created capacity. And I want to suggest that the real challenge in a country like India or most of Africa or Pakistan, where things are frankly even worse, is the electron problem is solved. As Jigar says, this is not about technology. The credit problem is being stuffed under the rug. Nobody wants to say, we will bank the poor. And I don't think this problem is going to get solved quickly unless somebody big decides to bank the poor. And the obvious candidate, frankly, is either a state or central government, but it could be somebody else. And the third thing, and where I think those of you in this room come in, is there need to be lots and lots of people on the ground who can help put this together. But with those three ingredients, by 2030, every household in India can have reliable electricity to the extent they can afford the appliances. If we do this right, the electricity story in rural and urban India in 2030 will not be, do the lights come on, but can I afford a washing machine? That's a very different question. And that's the question we need to try to move on to.
I'm not sure exactly how to answer this, what's the meaning. I think from what I understand, you're asking why this is compelling, right? Why are we sort of
Why these
interested
three
in doing
areas
this?
are
So, okay, if I boil it down to two areas, I'm not sure how to distinguish between community power and mini grids, but power and mobile phones, or sort of connectivity and energy, I think they're sort of leverage for people to increase productivity on whatever asset they have, whether it's their time, it's a shop, it's a farm. You give them energy and connectivity, they can make more money with what they already have. The third and missing piece of it is financial leverage. That's sort of not covered here, but is required to make these two possible. And I think that's what Carl was also talking about. And it's definitely something that we see on the ground. But I've seen so many examples now, and well, my favorite example is that of owners of small bars or small cafes. When they say, look, yesterday I did not have electricity. Today I have some electricity with which I can run lanterns and maybe a small TV. And my income has gone from X to 2X. Daily income doubled, because now I can be open between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. And to me, that's sort of a great example of why energy has such immediate impact on people and increases their productivity, and that's why we are here.
I would say that it's kind of appalling that we live in the 21st century and so many people don't have access to modern energy. They're, it's lights and TVs, and so I think from a social perspective, there's a tremendous business case. But it just, I think, there's when we are talking of 1.2 billion people not having access to modern energy services. But that just, I feel it's appalling in a sense as a business case, but from a social perspective, I think it's very important to look at that. So that I think that's one of, when we say powering people, is giving people access to technologies and modern energy services that are mostly available to several other folks. So I would say that's one of the motivations that, in addition to the business case, why this is an extremely important topic. And people have had modern energy services for 150 years. So in addition to that, I would say that because there is such technology dynamism on the supply side, that the costs of solar technology and other technologies, which are more interesting from a small business perspective. Like if you want to build a big coal power plant, right? It's literally, you cannot build, like 5 people cannot come together and build a 1,000 megawatt coal plant. It requires $5 billion worth of investment. But the technologies are more modular, more accessible. That's on the supply side. So when we say powering people, it's also powering the business community in terms of innovation, in terms of business model, because the modular nature of the supply side technology, as well as there is tremendous innovation on you don't the only use of electricity directly is to electrocute yourself. You need lights and televisions and stuff, right? So there is innovation on that side as well. So I would say when we say powering people, it's also for welfare, but also in terms of, because of the modular nature of technology, you can have different business models, which doesn't always require the traditional large-scale industries. So that's where I think powering people has that understanding as well.
Yeah, I thought about the powering poor, and I have a slightly different perspective here. I'll build upon what Carl said. If you're not getting reliable 24/7 electricity, to us, you're energy poor. And that, if you know about Indian grid, the grid infrastructure in India, which is unreliable, which has a huge supply-demand gap, which has very skewed distribution policies and pricing policies, which really make it truly dysfunctional, not just technologically. So that definition is going to cover a whole bunch of people. And to us, there are people like factories which cannot run extra shift and they have to cut down employees because it's a road shift. To us, that's businesses, like we said, they're paying more for electricity than their payroll, so obviously they hire less people. That affects poor people. That's friends of mine who run hospitals, and they have such huge diesel generation bills. And these are hospitals like state of the art in the middle of small towns where people travel 200 kilometers to come there. But the diesel costs have to be passed down to the poor people, and that's the only place they come for electricity. So to us, if you are adding sustainable generation capacity, which is bypassing this completely dysfunctional grid and really helping people, then you're truly empowering the energy poor in India.
Shikhar, what do you have to say?
Well, I'll just add to what other folks have said. So I'll talk about it from the business model side. When Carl talked about guaranteeing a loan, what he meant to is that the full faith and credit of the U.S. government actually backed all those loans in the Rural Electric Association, right, REA?
Yeah, but let me make one point. The U.S. government made money on this loans.
Oh yeah, no, I don't mean it that. I don't mean it negative.
But I didn't say that. They made money on those loans.
They did make money in the loans, and so I mean, let's just to take an example of how this works. So for those of you from India, many of you know that when we were younger, it took 12 to 15 years to get a phone line in your house and a waiting list. Today we have mobile phones, and everyone has one, and many people have two. The difference between what Carl was talking about and what the mobile phone industry did was the mobile phone industry basically used private sector capital as opposed to public capital. The mobile phone industry used capital that basically cost between 25 and 30% interest to do their work. It was all private equity capital. And for those of you who are from India, you know that inflation itself is 9%, and so 25% is actually a pretty reasonable price for interest. Whereas the government of India itself borrows money at roughly 9%. And so that's the delta between doing it from the private sector to the public sector. And so if we can get the government of India to step up and provide credit guarantees, then that would be useful. You could get 9% interest money, but in the wake of that, you can do 25% interest money. Then going off of what some of my other panelists talked about, where diesel is today, I mean, just to put that in perspective for you, last year the Indian people installed 10,000 megawatts of brand new diesels for their needs, right? And you can imagine that most of these people are rational, so they're not building diesel because they really want to bankrupt themselves. They build it because they actually believe that the GDP growth that they can create from their own businesses or whatever is through the presence of electricity is worth paying whatever the cost is of that electricity, right? So for those people who are doing that, the cost of diesel fuel, which is currently subsidized, but I think is becoming almost unsubsidized within the next year or so, it generates power between 40 cents a kilowatt hour if you're Wipro or others and are powering your entire campus off of it and you're very efficient, to over $1 a kilowatt hour if you have a really small one that's not maintained well, right? So you can imagine at those types of prices, the work that we're doing and the technologies that we represent can absolutely sustain 25% rates of return. So we actually have the ability to make 25% rates of return if we choose to go that way. I mean, just to quickly talk about grids and microgrids and community power, this is another way to aggregate demand and get access to lower cost capital, right? So for those of you, again, who understand Indian banking, if you have a village that comes together and decides to do this stuff, there's actually many schemes, as we call them in India, where, and there actually are, it's probably a double it's negative on positive. There are many schemes where you can actually get much lower cost capital, probably 8, 9, 10% cost of capital from local banks, sponsored, through some sort of set aside by the RBI, to get that money. So there actually is a way to get lower cost money if you can actually aggregate villages together to ask for that money and to create some sort of entity at a village level that would be, cooperatively responsible for paying back that money.
No, thank you. And this was good. I think this was a good segue for my next question, where we will be talking about the cost of capital in different countries, especially to India, and how could this be unlocked. But before I do that, I think we were talking offline, besides behind this panel. The solar industry or the renewable industry is really moving from electrons and photons or technology to real mainline industry, where you need more sales guys and the selling and the capital and all those things, installers. So this is really moving in that. My view is that the biggest impact on the mobile phone is really empowering people is the internet and mobile phone in the last 10 years and decade had the biggest impact on society. If it is an advanced society like us, the Twitters and the Facebook on phone, or if it is a society like India where my maid can call my mom and say, I'm not coming today, my mom is powered, she feels powered, that she knows she is not coming. So that has had the biggest impact in the last 10 years, and enabling that at least makes a lot of sense. I just want to thank my own company, SunPower, that sponsored the dinner and the wine today. I hope you all enjoyed it. But talking about SunPower, we have a SunPower Foundation. We have big factories in Philippines, and there's a dump yard called the Black Mountain, where people cannot even see anything in daylight in their homes. 1,000 families living over there. Their average income a day is $1 a day, and they spend 60% on water, food, shelter, 35% on energy, light, and 5% on mobile phone charging. So what we did, we created this a TiE as a container, and we put it over there, and then they pay something like 10 cents, which is not 40% of what they spend. They pay 10 cents to have a solar lantern, and everybody is happy, the kids are happy, and they can say things. So you're right, you guys are right. It's a business model that makes economic sense and also create a lot of good work for the society. Well, after having said that, it is really Jigar, this is a question for you, starting with you. What is the real, you said it is embarrassing to have a 8% IRR and 9% inflation, and the cost of capital is pretty expensive in India, talking with reference to Indian context. What do you think is the innovation, is business model? What can unlock that business model, and how do you think it is a very obvious thing, diesel is buck a kilowatt hour and you can make money. How do you get there?
Well, I think the first answer to that is not to fight it, right? I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that somehow, sort of come to the mistaken conclusion that the interest rate is our challenge, right? That if the cost of capital was lower, we would just be, deploying renewable energy like it's going out of style. And the fact of the matter is that it's the cost of capital is what it is in India because the risk of working in India is what it is in India, right? So the cost of capital is exactly what it should be in India. It's not any lower or better or it needs to be higher. To do work, think about SunEdison, which is, I think, at this point has built more solar in India than any other company. And, the Indian rupee has gone from, 45 to the dollar to 62 in the time that it's doing it. Now, SunEdison has gotten US dollar denominated debt from OPEC and other folks that they have to pay back. And they have fixed rupee cost per kilowatt hour coming from the power purchase agreement contracts. So, luckily, SunEdison made sure that the return on equity was over 20%. So they actually have enough room to be able to actually pay debt service. If they didn't, they'd be bankrupt, right? So, I think that's the reason the cost of capital is what it is in India is because doing business in India is risky. So then the question becomes, if the cost of capital is fixed, then what opportunities exist at that cost of capital? And there are many, right? So for instance, there are many companies who have done the conversion of mobile phone towers in India to renewable energy. Today, creditworthy counterparties like Bharti Airtel and others are paying over 40 cents a kilowatt hour, in some cases 70 cents a kilowatt hour, to provide power to their mobile phone towers. And there's over 100,000 of them that are running pretty much on diesel only, and they're adding something on the order of around 4,000 to 5,000 of those towers every month that are still running on diesel, right? So that market alone is a multi-billion-dollar market to convert them to not only solar, but gasified biomass and other technologies that are out there that renewable in nature. And at least the company that I funded got a contract from Bharti Airtel at 24.5 rupees per kilowatt hour index to inflation. And so that price is actually going up every year by 8 or 9%. And so that at that price point, you can actually make good money providing that. The same thing's true with solar lanterns. There are companies like Lumalight, for instance, that works in Africa, or in Zambia specifically, but the market actually mechanism is the same, where they actually have a central shop that actually charges the mobile phone or mobile lights, right? These Firefly lights, and the lights themselves only have a battery and a LED. So it's sort of you take it home and it has 12 hours of light, and then when it's out, you have to bring it back and replace it with a new light. So that's when you have to pay again for power. And it's quite a profitable business, right? Generating 100% return each year. So there are a tremendous number of models today that can actually live within the interest rates of India. And then once you actually get to a certain scale, you can see how the government of India may actually find it within its interests to allow for renewable energy developers to access low-cost capital through Power India or some of the other mechanisms that they put in place for the coal industry to get low-cost interest financing that we could access as well.
So what are your views on a small scale businesses that you're promoting in India? I'm sure Khosla Ventures is not funding all of it. You are looking for money. Are you raising money in India? And if you are, what are the issues for you to promote a little bit more business and get equity from India?
So I think Jigar's right in the sense that if you're trying to fight that battle, if you have a business which has a very, very low return profile and you want to compete in a market which needs a high return profile, it's an uphill battle. That's the sort of simple answer. And a lot of companies that we work with, for them pricing is a particular challenge because you know that pricing is the most sensitive component of increasing your market demand, right? That's like, it's not about convenience or service as much as it is about pricing. I think what we advise our companies to do is think about it from a life cycle point of view. Today, what it is, if your company is about $1 million in revenue and you have a few thousand customers that you have sold to, the business model you need and the pricing you need and the return profile you need is very different from what you might get away with when you have $100 million or $200 million in revenue. The investors will ask for different things from you at that time, but you need to figure out what you need to do today to survive and become a large company. So when our companies are small, we focus on finding high-value customers who can actually afford to pay the sort of pricing and have a very high need for the product. The way we usually identify those customers is to understand who has the most return on investment. Which customer will actually benefit so much from adopting this company's product that they will be able to pay the sort of pricing the company needs to charge to attract investments and grow larger and larger. And over time, as the company needs to grow a larger customer base, but has become a stable company that can attract capital with a lower cost, you can afford to tinker with pricing, go from upfront cash payment models to pay-as-you-go models where you take a lot of the capital risk. These things are much harder to do on day one when you're a small entity and struggling for financing. So to add to a lot of the things that have already been said, I think taking the life cycle approach to how you are scaling your company's model is also pretty important.
And that's good, but Carl, I want to get your perspective on these approaches are good when you're solving a niche problem at a smaller scale. When we're talking about 800 gigawatt consumption in China versus 150 gigawatt in India, and we have a lot of runway. If energy and electricity is a huge impetus to growth, then we got to get there. If we have to get there, we have to start thinking much bigger. We start thinking much bigger scale. Then these models, these examples, might not really work. what do you think? Do you think we can bring in external capital into India, like Exim Bank or Japan, their cost of capital is pretty small, but if there's a return, how do you manage those kind of risk and how do you bring in those innovation in capital market for India, for thinking big?
Well, let's assume for the moment we're going to provide more electricity somehow in rural India. And you sort of got two models. And I want to describe the first model, which is the one that most of the capital is flowing to now. It is a model which the World Bank finds financeable. It is a model which the Asian Development Bank finds financeable. It's a model which Deutsche Bank finds financeable. It's a model which the government of India finds financeable. It involves digging up a marginal ton of coal, and the marginal ton of coal for the Indian market is dug in the interior of Australia by miners making Australian wages at Australian costs, shipped on an Australian railroad, burning up a lot of diesel fuel to get to the port. And when it gets to the port, it's $85 a ton. It then, by the time it gets to a coal-fired power plant in Chennai, it costs about $115 a ton. It's then burned in that power plant in Chennai, and 60% of its caloric value is turned into waste heat, and 40% is turned into electrons. Those electrons are then shipped in an extremely inefficient grid, and by the time they arrive to the substation, another 60% of the value is gone. Only 40% actually gets to the substation. And at the substation, we then put it in a copper wire, which we run perhaps 12 kilometers to a village. And for every kilometer of copper wire, for every kilowatt hour that arrives in the village, there's an initial cost of 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So if you're 12 miles off the grid, you've got 24 cents in cost just for that last mile connectivity, which is actually the cost of power from solar. Because with solar, yes, you have a high-tech process, perhaps in China, perhaps in India, perhaps in the Philippines, perhaps in the United States, where a solar panel is made. But the solar panel is very light. It doesn't take much diesel to get a solar panel from China to an Indian village. It takes a lot of diesel. Almost all those costs I described that are associated with the coal plant are actually the cost of diesel. So the reality is, in today's world, with copper at $338 a ton this morning, it is simply not affordable to provide power in remote locations with the traditional grid. It makes no underlying economic sense. If the subsidies and the risk absorption, the de-risking act, if all that is provided right now to the conventional energy sector were to be provided to the renewable sector, it would take off, Jacob. I understand you can still do business at 25%, but you can't do more business at 9%. And what is lacking, and I've had this conversation repeatedly, not just in India, many places, there is a perception that if it isn't coming from a big power plant, it's not big power. That's not just true anymore. That's simply a 10-year-old truth that isn't true now. And if people recognize that the wonderful thing about distributed renewable is it is scalable so much faster. Let me give you an example from India's neighbor to the west, which has an energy crisis that makes India's look trivial. In the capital city, they have electricity 2 hours a day. In the capital, 2 hours a day. They are in a bind because they banked their economy on natural gas, and now they run out of natural gas. Well, they have a lot of energy sources. They have some coal they could develop. It would take about 10 years. They have some big hydro they could develop. That might take 15 years. They have a natural gas pipeline they'd like to build to Iran. That will take as long as Barack Obama wants to make it take. They could put up solar panels within 6 months. And in a high interest rate economy, speed to market is money. So the huge advantage that these distributed technologies have is they can get to market fast. And they can be delivering electrons much faster than anything else. So the underlying reality is I am not worried that Indian villages will be powered by dirty coal-fired power plants. I have zero anxiety on that score. It is not going to happen. What I am worried about is 10 years from now, they still won't have power. Because we will still be waiting for the coal-fired grid. And that would be criminal.
No, that's very good, and I think distributed generation is catching up. I was just reading a call last week. I was talking to several Chinese friends. China had put in a huge power plant, solar capacity in the west of China. Now the transmission cost is huge, transmission efficiency is bad. So the projected 10 gigawatt that China will be doing next year, 6 gigawatt is subsidized for the rooftops and industries. And you buy electricity in China for 15 cents a kilowatt hour. If you put solar panels on your rooftops, you can sell electricity back to the utilities at 7 cents a watt. But why would you do that? Because you're buying at 15 cents a watt. But if you use it yourself, the government gives you 5 cents more and you don't have to pay 15 cents. So that's a subsidy that a couple of these emerging countries are signing up for supporting distributed generation. I think I want to be moving, in the interest of time, this is a good discussion. We were talking about the innovation in capital. I think there is still, although the electrons are available in plenty, but as the business models are changing, as the distribution generation is becoming more and more predominant, I think there's an innovation left in system integration, not in generation, not in anything else, but in system integration of making the whole thing affordable. And I think there is we're talking about innovation. This is a solar impulse, a plane that had gone around the world in a couple of months. It has the highest efficiency solar panels. It is just powered by solar panels. By the way, happens to be our company solar panels. Talking about innovation, when I was putting this slide, I thought the one thing that comes to your mind is a light bulb. We had all been using innovation as light bulb. And I thought about changing that light bulb from Edison's old incandescent light bulb to LED light bulb. So please, if you are putting a slide together, innovation, start putting LED light bulb now. We don't make that, by the way. Technology, products, and system innovation. Where are VCs going? Where is Big Lab Berkeley? What is the next thing you guys are looking at when it comes to innovation? Innovation never ends. What is the technology innovation you guys are tracking?
So I would say that there's, of course, I can speak louder. There's tremendous innovation on the supply side of the market, that the solar costs have come down. But what I'm going to tell you today is, okay, in the amount of power you needed to power a light bulb that was shown in all those slides, incandescent bulb, it takes 60 watts to power that bulb. But right now we have commercially available technology today that within that 60 watts, with commercially available technology today, you can power a television, a light, and a ceiling fan. And I think that's game changing, because I want to buy a solar power, and my appetite to buy and pay for solar power will increase if I have more uses to it. I'm not going to buy a cricket bat if I don't have a playground to play with. You know? So it's like, so I think that's where I feel that at the lab we have tremendous focus on the demand side of the equation. It really, if you have innovation of making sure that the technologies that people use the power for are consuming far less power, it becomes far more attractive to use distributed solar power. And I think that's a business proposition from the cost side, because you have just cut down the size of your solar power system needed by 1/4. So I would say that that's one of the key things that we are looking at.
So you're looking at the consumption side, drive innovation on the consumption side. Sanjay, what do you have to say about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just share with what we've seen, as deploying renewable energy in the marketplace. And I think you were talking about, I think before, deployment cost in US of $5 a watt, in Germany at $2.50 a watt. And we are, in India, we spent like about 6 to 8 months time. We said we have to source the best technology in terms of models and inverters, because you can't get those done in India today. They've been proven out there. So we sourced the best of those. And so we brought our cost down to $1.50 per watt. And I think that cost came down because the huge amount of work we had to do was everything besides modules, inverters, and we're only talking solar technology, that's the only thing we do, and engineering design. Everything else requires, how do you get the balance of systems? How do you deploy all the stuff on the rooftop, and they're non-standard rooftops in India? How do you get huge amount of manpower and all of that stuff? And that was really happening on the ground where we partner with a civil construction company, we partner with an electrical company, and we literally create our own designs of how do we get this within a week of this components arrive at the site. How do we get this all completely installed in a very customized way? Because some of our customers are doing bespoke customized roofs. They're creating like canopies on top of 3-story buildings and then putting rooftops on them so they get extra space to use. The building cools down. And so we create a lot of innovations around how to deploy a huge amount of manpower within a week or 2 weeks time. How do you get different components made locally? How to get them sourced locally? It's not a very sexy step. It's not something you ever want to go to a VC to get funding for, because we'd rather make money ourselves on it. But I think that's really kind of innovations you need when you actually take this technology to a very specific place and actually deploy it there. One innovation we would love to get from Berkeley Labs and maybe companies you guys fund is that the traditional inverter systems and the DC engineering stuff has been designed for developed markets, USA, Germany, all that stuff, and this is where the grid is reliable. And once you go in the unreliable grid where integrated diesel, you have battery management systems, you have load shedding going on, you still have to get some solar power. All of that's going to be surprising how many companies have not still designed something that's really, really designed from the ground up, keeping in mind the requirements on the ground. So that's simple technology innovation we would love to get.
Yeah, we have Steve in the audience. I just met for the first time today from our company called Automatics. Please raise your hand. Here you go. We were just trying to solve the same problem. You guys should definitely connect. That's very close to my passion. It was great. Jacob, what do you have to say? I think there is a combination of, and I totally agree with that. The innovation has not to come in electrons, now the innovation has to come in the peripheral market. And we were just talking about it. How do you link the business, the countries, the societies, and innovation beyond electrons?
Well, I think that, just to answer the other question first, the beauty of working in India is that the talent and the capacity to do the system integration work and product design and innovation exists on the ground, right? So India was the first country in the world to install solar at sub $1.40 a watt, for large scale solar, right? So today you're getting a lot of folks around the world, including the US, that are actually learning from the innovations that they created in India and bringing it back here to Arizona and California and other places. So I think that's important. I think that the piece that you're talking about in terms of going beyond electrons matters. Is in places like India, the electrons are not really a commodity, right? Because you can't get it to the right place. So what the electrons actually power, which is what we just talked about, whether it's a color television or a ceiling fan or whatever, can be value-based priced, right? So you can actually value-based price a color television because people really want to see their serials and all the other things that they haven't been able to do to date, right? And they're willing to pay a much higher price for that, to do that. The other innovation that you can see on the financing side, which I think you have here in the Bay Area, you have SunFunder that's doing some of this really interesting crowdsourcing models. But other folks who are doing interesting work as well are working with diaspora around folks who are actually providing money anyway to support families and other folks in India. Instead of giving them cash, giving them these types of innovations that they can use on the ground to actually make their lives more comfortable and more enriching. In the same way that many of us have sent Vonage phones and other things over to India to reduce our costs and improve our quality of communications, people are looking at some of these other technologies as well overseas.
Great, Sandhya, I think we should be sharing your views, and I'm showing Twitter and Facebook logos over here for a reason. My experience in the last couple of years, I have been meeting a lot of you guys at Sand Hill Road, and nobody is excited today in looking at investment in the VC money in renewable energy. There's a reason. as I believe, is if I scan the whole investment, it had gone into the fundamental technology, creating solar cell efficiency, creating panels, creating those things. And a lot of money was invested and not much came out of it. But not much money has been invested in really solving the commissioning process, the simple commissioning process, simple monitoring process, simple aggregation process, or aggregating energy and selling it in a wholesale market. Not much money has been spent in really looking at the problem in a more holistic way. Are you guys shying away? You're just taking a back seat? You guys see no future in this area? Or things are going to be changing?
So actually, I'm probably not a good person to really answer the question, because what I am focusing on is renewable energy, so I can't really answer for those who are not focusing on it. But to just build on sort of what folks have been saying, and maybe to address your overall question of sort of what needs to be funded and what innovations happening outside of just basic technology innovation. I think there's a huge need for innovation around product, not technology, but product. Like, how do you define a product so that it actually works on the ground? Solar products don't work 30% of the time on the ground, and everyone knows financing is a problem. Products not working is also a huge problem. The reason why no one talks about it is because the companies who sell these products don't know they are not working, have no relationship with the customer, have a fleeting relationship with the distributor. Think if you're on the enterprise side of the business, it's a bit different, because then you do have a customer relationship. On the direct B2C side, when you're selling into rural households, there are very poor customer relationships. So I think there is a lot of innovation required in understanding how to integrate local communities into your business model, how to do distribution efficiently, how to do customer service. You're now working with customers and selling them energy who have never really received customer service from anyone ever before, right? And you're sort of an organized company trying to do this in a cost-efficient way, do 25% return on equity. All of that needs a lot of product innovation and needs application of the technologies that allow Facebook and Twitter to be capital efficient. All that needs to be applied on the ground, and a different attack needs to be taken to solve some of these problems. And we see that happening in quite a few companies on the ground. There are at least 5-6 good companies that are trying energy as a service now, instead of just selling a product, $100, $200 product upfront to a household and assuming that it will work for 3 or 4 years. For these households, it's sort of like the equivalent of buying a car that just breaks down and has no servicing, right? So it's energy as a service, I think, will really help to drive more demand, along with appliances. Thinking of it as energy first and solar second.
Yep, totally agree with that. Since you represent the VC community on this panel here, I think so you can't get away by saying that I'm focused and others I don't know about that. Since you represent the VC community, and everybody over here is either an entrepreneur or is an aspiring entrepreneur.
Okay. So
What is your recommendation? So what I hear from you saying is, now there are opportunities and there are small investment, but a huge customer experience that has to come, because energy is not energy is a service. What is your recommendation? What areas should these guys be looking at to look for the next big thing in the energy sector?
Distribution, I think, is and that's sort of, if you look at a lot of the companies in the US that have made money off the clean tech wave, I think a lot of them have solved problems around financing and distribution. Not a lot of companies which are focused on the tech side have actually created a lot of shareholder value for investors. And that got commoditized pretty quickly. So I would say distribution and actual last mile delivery of energy is probably a very, very valuable space.
I totally agree with that.
To invest your time and money.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I have a question for you, because since we're talking about Roosevelt time, I had opportunity of visiting some of the transformer companies. Transformers are really, really critical, apart from inverters and panels or everything. I mean, I work in solar, so I can talk about solar. The transformers are really critical. Half the time we have failure. We had failure in inverters as well when I was a part of San Edison team that time. Half the time we have seen transformers failing. So I had a chance of visiting transformer industry, and I had all those steel boots and helmets and all those things which I never done before in my life. But those guys very clearly admitted these designs were done in 50s, and they have not changed a single thing on those transformers. What do you see? What do you think is the mindset of the industry creating an end-to-end reliable quality product? I would not even say product, solution. Do you think the mindset of those traditional industries, would it change, or what would it take for them to change?
Well, let me first, if you look at these electrons, and this was I could make this statement with more certainty 5 years ago than I could today. But 5 years ago, I could say these electrons came from either a thermal power plant fundamentally designed when Calvin Coolidge was president, or from a nuclear power plant designed when Nikita Khrushchev was the premier of the Soviet Union. They were transmitted here through electromechanical switches designed when Harry Truman was in office, and they're in light bulbs which either go back to 1923 Germany or 1908 New York City, depending on whether they're incandescents or fluorescents. This, I can call a taxi driver in Mumbai, and my signal doesn't pass through a single piece of equipment designed more than a decade ago. So, we have a real innovation gap in the energy sector. And the reason we have that gap is not because the people in the energy sector are not creative or smart, but because in the 1920s, with the technology that existed at that point, we made a choice to create monopolies where the provider took the reliability risk and then had guaranteed returns and didn't have to innovate. So there was a trade-off made. And it was the right trade-off for 1924. It's not the right trade-off for 2013. So the industry's fundamentally sluggish. Now that's an opportunity for the people in this room. That's not bad news for you. That's good news for you. Because here's the kind of thing that the industry cannot take advantage of. Take a solar panel, imagine its cost is cut by 2/3. That's happened in the last 3 years. Take a television and imagine that its required electrons to be operated is cut by 2/3. That's happened in the last 5 years. Take the cost of that television and imagine it's cut by 2/3. That'll happen in the next 2 years. You've suddenly taken a service that cost $1 5 years ago, and it now costs 4 cents. That is completely disruptive. But, that kind of disruption does not guarantee that every entry makes money. In the United States, of the automobile companies that started between 1900 and 1915, 90% of them were gone by 1925. That's disruption.
Mm-hmm.
But what made that possible in the United States, and this is my hobby horse, and Jago thinks I ride this hobby horse too hard. The reason it was possible for the United States to develop the automotive revolution was because that market was highly liquid. It was flooded with capital for people to start companies and fail. And what we have seen in this sector is a premise that every solar panel manufacturer should make money. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. We need to flood the renewable energy sector and the distributed energy sector in India with liquidity of some sort so that enough players can make enough mistakes that we can get it right. And I want to say one thing. I'm actually going to have to leave in a couple minutes, and I want to express my tremendous appreciation to you. I've got something in camp with my family, so I will not be here for the end, but this has been an amazing evening, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Carl. Thank you very much. When listening to this panel, my synthesis is there is still innovation left in electrons, and there is still innovation left in creating user experience. User experience is something that all of us look for, And electrons innovation is something that the guys who are behind us, giving us user experience, they need to make money. Talking about China again, these guys realize transmission lines are not effective, taking electrons from West Coast to East Coast. What they're doing is they have passed, I don't know how many dollars of bills for creating 1 megavolt DC transmission line from Inner Mongolia to Shanghai. That's innovation. I remember talking to Vinod myself once upon a time and talking about the electronic transformers that could be controlled anywhere, programmed anywhere. That's innovation in an area. So why I'm saying all this, why this question was, well, you guys are interested in where are the opportunities? This is good, food is good, panel is good, everybody's fine. What am I going to do? So I have two, thank you very much. Please give him a big hand. This is great. Jigar, this is a question for you and Sanjay for you. My friends, as I was telling you, doing telecom towers, and one day he reaches to his side and find panels are missing, they're stolen. And they're stolen, his story was that all these operators, they make money by diesel pilferage. Now this diesel has gone down, so how do they make money? That they took over the solar panel. And they go to, they took over the solar panel. And he goes to file a FIR, and those who do not know what FIR is filing the first complaint with in a police station. And he's filing a complaint, and you see the same panel in the police station, but he can't do anything about it. There's a social transformation that has to come along with technology transformation. How do you see those challenges creating mini grids where I've seen copper wire, $338 a ton, stolen overnight, panels stolen overnight? How do you guys see solving those problems?
Well, there is a pilferage and what do you say? Pilferage and theft.
Yeah.
It's everywhere in India.
Yeah.
I grew up there, so I know. I'll give you an example, slightly aside. I went to my small town, it was about 3 months in the business, and we're trying to create a business model where we didn't want to take any subsidies. Because if you had to take a subsidy, you go to government bureaucrats and go to state level and then the government level and the central level and all that stuff. We met all the secretaries there and I realized that I don't want to deal with these guys. These are nice guys, but they're people who work for them, not that nice guys. One of my neighbor's kids, sort of 25 years old, comes to my house and says, if you wanted to bribe somebody in the Pune Mera department, like does electricity stuff, I know how to get the bribe to them. So the moment you try to do anything in India, there will be people who want to have a piece of action. They will knock on your door, they come to you. And I talked to a lot of my friends run business in India, and I think there's a strategy how you deal with that. One is you have to give a clear message out that you're not into giving bribes, and you're not into satisfying people. Once the message goes out, these people will seek out somebody else. That's number one. Number two, taking on a diesel mafia, that's not a small thing. And I think the only way it's going to work is that we realize that we have to make allies wherever we go. So maybe we have an easier problem than these guys had. But we go into commercial areas where we say every one of our customers who is a powerful business person, maybe their group, their lobby, their chambers of powerful entities, all of them want what we're doing. They're pulling for it. Now they're already buying diesel, so they're going to ramp up their renewable consumption, they're going to ramp down their diesel consumption. So it's not sort of a overnight shut off kind of situation. So you don't want to create that situation anytime soon. So you want to kind of ease into it. And the third thing is that you never want to go in a place saying diesel is bad, because in the end, today's meeting a lot of needs that anything else cannot meet. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, even today, diesel cannot meet all the needs people have at the price points people are willing to pay for it. Yeah. So I think there are just tactical ways of going about it. There's no way to undo all of that. That's a real challenge, and you just have to deal with it.
So it will take time. Jigar, what do you have to say about it?
Oh, look, I agree. I mean, so we have telecom towers that we have contracts for in Rajasthan, and the way we've dealt with it is instead of doing solar, we've used gasified biomass. What you find with these diesel mafias in general is that They're not as criminal as the words would suggest. They're more sort of Robin Hood. And they use that money that they get from diesel pilferage to have local power and control. So what we've been able to do is, because we have biomass supply chains, we have over 400 people employed in each of the areas just in biomass. And we pay a slightly higher price for the biomass than we would normally, and the diesel mafia takes that piece of it that's higher, so they get paid for doing that. And so we work within the cultural aspects of what's there. The returns that we're making are able to pay the 25% returns, and everyone's happy. And we actually get a secure supply of biomass every week when we need it, and all those things. So I do think that there's a tremendous amount of practical sort of implications of the deployment of our technology, and the best laid academic plans seem to ruin if you don't really learn things on the ground. So.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Work with the system and still make money. That's great. Now, I'm a great fan of Karan Johar, rapid round kind of thing. So I have only one last question for all of you, and that's a real quick question. What do you guys think we really need to do with this technology? I'm skipping this slide, which is a telecom tower that we do. We have been to more than 2,500 plus installations in Africa on telecom towers, solar panels. Quick question for four of you is technology, is business model, is social reform, whatever it is, if you have to really unlock the market, I'm talking solar market, you really have to unlock the market, what would you do? What would you recommend? Starting with you, Jigar.
Thanks. So one of the things that I look at is channel innovation, and I think that like I'm a donor to a charitable program in India called Eco-Vidile, and they basically provide essential education in 55,000 villages around India, and the cost for me is about I think $365 per school per year. When you look at some of those villages and what they're doing, some of these technologies that we're talking about are essential to providing the mission of Eco-Vidile, right? So for kids that are over the age of 8 or 9, many of them have to actually work during the day, and so actually having light at night matters if they want to continue their education. There are a lot of other challenges locally, from clean drinking water, of which there are a lot of concentrating solar thermal solutions for that, to make 20 liters of water per day using evaporative cooling techniques. And so my sense is that these nonprofit organizations, as well as for-profit organizations that have essential channels to market in these places, are critical to leverage, because I think what you'll find is that they actually already have the trust of the community. They actually know about some of the local issues that we just discussed, and can navigate them better than us actually rebuilding it from the ground up. And I think that's the way solar is going to scale in India over the next 4 or 5 years.
Okay, Jigar took a really good one, because that's really building an ecosystem. There's a lot of trust involved. That's a huge thing. But the second thing is that if you really had to unlock distributed solar generation in India, and I would tell you the same thing I told the secretary of MNRE, the renewable industry people. They came here and I said, look, just do one thing, stop all subsidies.
Yeah, great.
I would say that one has to really look at it from an energy service model perspective and not solar, because then you are able to integrate the cost reduction not just on solar but also on the demand side. So if you put that together, you can provide the energy service at 1/4 of the cost. And I think that's the answer.
I think for us, one thing that we are very bullish on is good pay-as-you-go systems and business models, which a lot of folks are trying, and I think that will really unlock there are a lot of things that need to come into place for pay-as-you-go to actually work, and I think that will open up access to our markets. But once it starts working, it will a lot of it will become about financial capital, the ability to pool together the right kind of funding to scale a energy service model.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and this was a good discussion. I was telling the panelists before this discussion that I'm expecting a lot of stimulating questions from the audience today. You guys have been a good listener. It's a time for you to be asking good questions, and I'm sure our panelists will be able to really help you guys with your questions.
Based on the data that you guys provided in your talk, I did some rough calculations. To bring India's generation capability to the level of China, we need to produce about 1 megawatt per village extra. Is it possible? Are there any solutions which can produce this energy on a distributed basis rather than being a part of the grid? Is it a 1 megawatt viable solution available at this time?
Sure. So I think your question is from a resource perspective, is there enough distributed solar
Can I
available?
produce that much energy on a village?
Yes, certainly. So if you look at the amount of land that's needed and the intensity of solar, you can certainly produce that. And what one has to remember in that sense is that China has to to go to that level of service. You don't have to produce 800 gigawatts because your demand side technology, if you leapfrog on that, you can provide the same amount of service in 400 gigawatts. So considering that there's a lot of it's very good quality solar resource and you have innovated on the demand side, there's enough resource on the distribution side.
But from an investment point of view, what is the solution that a person can go after? What will be the solution to produce half a megawatt on a village level?
Well, the first way to frame the conversation is that there isn't a lack of dollars, right? And so the amount of money, if you talk to most of the economists respected by all the political parties in India today, what they'll tell you is that the real reason for the rupee's devaluation from 44 to 62 is the cost of importing diesel fuel for these purposes, right? So I mean, in general, people are very focused on trying to figure this out. And the money is there, and in fact, by investing the money into those projects locally, you can actually help the government of India on both sides, right? Because you can keep U.S. Hard currency in the country to be used for more productive purposes than buying diesel fuel.
Da